We've all said plenty this week and the previous week about how bad the handling of this has been by the Andrews government, but in New South Wales, I think we might be witnessing the signs of another major bungle. I so hope I'm wrong. But New South Wales Health, the ones who starred in the handling of the Ruby Princess, are refusing to use CCTV footage to trace the behaviour of COVID-19 carriers at more than 20 venues where infected patrons spent time last week. Now, many of these venues which have had to close and clean their premises, they want to help. They've offered to give the tracing investigators CCTV footage. How helpful would that be? You could see the person that you know now is infected, see the behaviour of that person, how close they came to others. You'd think they'd dive on it. But in what needs to be called out as one of the most damaging cases of political correctness in this pandemic, maybe apart from Vic Health allowing people not to be tested, the health department is refusing to use the footage for privacy reasons. Isn't saving lives more important than one or two narcs who may or may not whinge about their faces being seen and only being seen by tracing investigators at the most? I just think this is madness. When we walk into these places, we see the cameras. We know the publicans have access to that vision. It's like during times of heightened terrorism. The public must lose some degree of civil liberty for the safety of themselves and, of course, the rest of the community. Let's hope this doesn't slow down the tracing process, although, will we ever know the truth? The Health Minister should be telling his underlings and lawyers, who are obviously in their ears, who haven't been hurt by COVID-19, mind you, that this is a state of emergency. In a pandemic, you use all the weapons at your disposal, don't you? Start using them. Now, some helpful advice about what this country needs to do today has come from former Prime Minister Tony Abbott. In a column piece in The Australian and as part of a podcast series, Tony Abbott says, forget questions of quarantine and JobKeeper. The biggest policy question is the extent to which saving lives should or should not take precedence over preserving the economy. And this is something that was identified very early on by the Prime Minister. Tony Abbott says it's not in our nature as humans, especially as Australians, to be ready for long stays under the doona. It's wrong, he says, that our politicians solely consider the advice of unelected medical bureaucrats to the exclusion of all other economic priorities.
Recalling the words of Clemenceau, I think it was, who said war is too important to be left to the generals. Well, if I may paraphrase him, pandemics are far too important to be left to the doctors. In the end, it is vital that the elected politicians maintain direction of events, direction of policy. Listen to all the epidemiologists, not just to the ones that are, as it were, banging the panic drum.
Spot on. He talks about deciding who we are as Australians as well and getting on with having a go. Remember when we used to say that a lot in this country? Have a go. We're having a go. Not specialising in identity politics. Having a, as Abbott says, an up yours attitude. And maybe that's the attitude we need to adopt when facing this virus and thinking every second day that we need to lock everything down. No, up yours. Maybe we should be stating that clearly. Catch us if you can, but we've got work to do. Up yours. Here he is talking about that Aussie spirit we know and love.
The two things that I think most characterise Australia are this instinct for the fair go, but the corresponding instinct to have a go. And I keep saying, if you want to get a go, you've got to give a go.
He also points out that in this podcast series that it's time politicians took a 20% pay cut. Now, we've discussed this plenty of times on plenty of programs at Sky News because, as Abbott says, we haven't been in this together. We have a private sector calamity. And I'm sorry, Scott Morrison, a freezing of public servant wages, a freezing of ministers' wages just doesn't cut it. Now, I was watching a number of Labor MPs today try and carve up the government on a number of issues, from this apprenticeship training program being suspect to unemployment being the result also of a lack of growth before the virus hit. And that's all fine in the cut and thrust of a big day in national affairs. But how about a bit of respect, a bit of old-fashioned manners? Have a listen to Jim Chalmers. This bloke is a would-be Labor leader. Firstly, a would-be Treasurer. This is the way he referred to the Prime Minister and Treasurer.
Morrison and Frydenberg have already delayed the release of this budget update twice.
Morrison and Frydenberg, really? Now, it's not a huge deal. But how hard is it to do what his boss does, Anthony Albanese, and call them by their titles? It can be the PM, Mr Morrison, the Treasurer, Mr Frydenberg. Albo does that. We keep talking, as we did last night, about a lack of respect in society nowadays, leading to attacks on paramedics and police, which shouldn't be accepted. This is part of the causation, is it not? Our nation's leaders saying, Morrison and Frydenberg, some manners would not go astray. Meanwhile, in Victoria, apart from the virus, everyone seems to be talking, at least from the phone calls I made today, about the GF, the AFL Grand Final, being held beyond the hallowed turf of the MCG. It's almost sacrilegious. But it's a probability, not a possibility. And the Queensland Premier has put in her official bid. But with a record 317 overnight infections, and as we know, 2 more deaths, Chairman Dan was calling today for some perspective.
A week's like a month. Maybe even a day's like a month, actually. The grand final is a long way off. You know, there are bigger things to worry about right now.
Lots to worry about.